Perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to today's panel. My name is Chala Chidik and I'm a career development specialist with West Virginia University Career Services Center. Today's discussion will be about expressing racial and ethnic diversity in the workplace. Many students may be hesitant to discuss their ethnic and racial background in professional settings. However, learning to express and recognize diversity and the challenges that come with that can actually help you embrace your identities and capitalize on your strengths, one of which is obviously diversity. Luckily, the times are changing and organizations increasingly understand the benefits of having a diverse workforce. Many organizations are hiring the right people for the right jobs, regardless of ethnic and racial backgrounds. However, despite these positive changes, you may still experience either intentional or unintentional prejudice and bias in the workplace. So today we will discuss how to navigate these situations and best practices through our panelists' experiences. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists, and maybe let's start with you, Sandrine, and then we'll go around the table.
Thanks, Chala. Hello, everyone. I'm Sandrine Akindo, a fellow WVU alum from 2017. I currently work at PepsiCo as a HR project manager and have been with the company now for a little over 5 years. Thank you.
Frank?
Hi, everybody. My name is Frank Yeboah. I'm currently at Penn State University as a compliance coordinator in the athletics department. I'm a double WVU alum, 2014 and 2017, and I've currently been at Penn State for about 2.5 years now.
Perfect. Isaac?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac May. I'm the Associate Social Media Strategist for Pew Research Center. I've been in this particular position for roughly 2.5 years, and I'm a 2017 graduate of West Virginia University. Happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for accepting to be here with us today. And we are looking forward to hearing your experiences and expertise. So before I jump into the questions, I'd like to highlight that National Association of Colleges and Employers identifies and outlines kind of 8 competencies to be successful in the workplace. And equity and inclusion is definitely one of them, not just for people with diverse backgrounds, but also people who are in position of power too. And the reason being for that is that injustice can come into many forms and different levels of intent. So it's really important to identify and respond to injustice in the workplace. First thing first is basically bias. And in this situation, the person doesn't necessarily intend any harm or exclusion, but they're still ignorant to certain facts. The best strategy to employ whenever you're addressing bias is using I statements to show people and expand their understanding of your feelings. Like, I felt this way when you said X is a good example. The other thing could be, or the other situation could be regarding prejudice, where the person actually means what they say. In this situation, it is really beneficial to kind of focus on the action and how it doesn't either fit into the organization's code of conduct, law, or even common sense. For example, it is illegal to do X, or it is against our company's policy to do Y. Lastly, it's obviously bullying or racism being mean. It is very intentional, directed towards a person or a group of people. And you need to really highlight the consequences with your response against this circumstance by using you statements. For example, you can't talk to me like that is a good example, and show that there will be consequences to their behavior. Overall, I statement kind of invites the other person in. Its statements show them where the fence is. And lastly, you statement pushes them away. So with that, I'd like to start asking some of the questions that we received from you, our students. So I think this first question could be for any of you or all of you. How do you express yourself in the workplace? For example, do you feel comfortable with your natural hair or your ethnic background? Yeah, let's start with maybe you, Frank.
Alrighty, so in terms of hair, I'm very comfortable with my natural baldness. It's real easy to get used to. But no, all jokes aside, I think for me particularly, I work in sports, which is generally more laid back than obviously your traditional like corporate office. So for us, obviously we're professional, but I think my group is a lot more inclusive than most, just because the nature of the work. Most of our student athletes are African American, the vast majority. So I think that alone makes it a little different for me. So I've never really felt uncomfortable, especially in my office. Very inclusive group. I'm the only non-white person in my office, but I know that whenever conversations of race come up, or you know anything really, they're comfortable talking about it, addressing it. I'm comfortable giving my input, knowing that I'm not going to be judged or you know looked at a certain way. So I'm very fortunate to work in a pretty inclusive office.
Perfect. How about either you, Sandrine, or Isaac?
I guess I'll go. So I too, similar to Frank, I feel very comfortable in the workplace, especially if, the example you gave, right, with my hair. I love wearing braids. Anyone who knows me knows most of the time they see me in braids or my natural hair is out. And I kind of took that into the workplace, right? So I remember during my internship, it was in upstate New York, right? I was very much a minority in the business there. And so I would get different kinds of compliments, right? Like, wow, you changed your hair so much. And wow, your hair is so beautiful. I want to touch it. And, I have to tell them no. But, I've always felt able to express myself through my hair. It's not something that I've ever restricted per se, because it's part of my identity. And to me, if I were to work for a company that tells me how I need to wear my hair or what's considered professional or not, I personally don't think I would want to work at that location or that particular organization, just because I won't feel completely comfortable. I won't feel like my best self, or that I can produce my best work there at that particular location. So I do consider myself blessed to be working at PepsiCo, where I'm embraced for who I am. And I actually had a colleague reach out to me a couple of years ago, and they said, "Hey, because of you, I feel comfortable wearing braids. I feel comfortable wearing cornrows into the office." And that meant a lot, because honestly, to me, it's just coming into work as myself and what makes me most comfortable. But I guess that's kind of like setting the example to someone else who I didn't even know, was watching the entire time. Especially, she finishes up by saying, "And you're in HR." And I was like, yes, yes, I'm in HR and I wear my hair like this, and I wear it naturally in this curly, kinky form sometimes. So yes, feel empowered to be yourself. Whatever makes you most comfortable, please show up that way in the workplace as well. And don't let anyone tell you you can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. This is really helpful, because I always have minority students asking me the question of, what should I do with my hair for the interview? And it's really important to be your authentic self and make sure that you are comfortable going into this interview and how they treat you even in the interview, and make your decision also based on those reactions as well. So definitely great insights. Thank you so much for that. So the next question, I'd like to ask you this, Isaac. What advice would you give someone looking for a diverse and culture promoting workplace?
Yeah, so something that I've started to look for since I've been in my current position is, I think an important question to ask is, what exactly is it that this particular company or organization or business is doing to continue to foster an area of different ideas, but also just diversity and inclusion. So something that I've learned that we have at the Pew Research Center, which I'm very blessed to kind of be a part of, is a type of diversity and inclusion council, right? And this is something that I'd never seen before at other offices and other places that I've worked throughout different parts of my career. And it's a part of the organization that is really just dedicated to making sure that everyone of different ethnic and racial backgrounds is feeling as included as possible, and is feeling about like they are just as much of a part of an organization as maybe someone who is Caucasian, or someone who is maybe more so in the majority. Looking for things like that. And again, I didn't realize this was a thing, that companies had these until I started working where I am now. So kind of looking for different parts of the organization, different pockets of the organization that are fostering that sort of culture. That's definitely something to look for, to look for as you're going into interviews and going into different organizations.
Perfect. And kind of to capitalize on that discussion, maybe this next question could be for you, Frank. How can you ensure that a workplace will be diverse and inclusive before accepting a job offer? So what are some of the signs that the students must be on the lookout to ensure that the place would be welcoming and diversity friendly?
Okay, that's a good question. I think there's a couple of things you can do, and I think Isaac brought up a good point in terms of like diversity, equity, and inclusion groups at the job. I'm a part of our ACDEI group on campus, in athletics specifically. And just asking the question, do they have a group like that at the job? And if they do have that group, how often do they meet? And like, when was the last meeting? Who's on that committee? What kind of initiatives have they actually implemented? Because what you don't want is to go somewhere that's performative in nature. Like, they've got the committee, but they don't actually do anything. You know what I mean? It's just to check a box. So asking those questions and being direct about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with just being very direct with the hiring managers and like, hey, what are you guys doing in these areas? And just, you don't have to be rude, but just ask the question. And depending on what they say, you can base your feelings off of that. Because at the same, obviously you're interviewing for a job, but you're interviewing them too, right? It works both ways, quite frankly. And I think especially at the first job, it's nerve-wracking, right? Because you don't want to come off like pretentious or anything, but you have to be happy with them too. Like, it works both ways. So don't ever be afraid to ask those questions like, hey, what are you guys doing in XYZ area? And hopefully they're active in those areas. And if they're not, ask them what's holding you back from being active in those areas. And maybe that's a niche that you can fill as well. If they're not doing quite as much, you can if you have that kind of experience, you can portray yourself in like, hey, you guys maybe aren't as strong in this space. This is something I'm really good at and I can contribute to. So you're killing two birds with one stone there.
Sure. Thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. And the next question, which is more HR in nature, Sandrine, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the best questions to ask post-interview in order to gain insights to an organization's culture?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I get that question a lot. So that, for me personally, I think when it comes to diversity and engagement, that question can be subjective. And so what I will say is understand what that means to you first. What values are you looking for in the organization, right? And because everyone is looking for something that aligns with their particular values. So when it comes to that particular question, when you're trying to assess the company's D&E, really focus, do a little bit of research beforehand. If you know people that work at that particular organization, talk to them, ask them what it's like working there, ask them if they feel supported, right? Read what the company is doing online, because usually they publish, right? Especially if it's a public company, they publish those results online in terms of, their diversity numbers and engagement programs as well, and even on their websites. And then in the interview, ask directly, how will they describe the culture at that company, right? And then also ask them, how do they keep employees engaged and motivated? Because that question alone, right, how they keep their employees engaged and motivated will tell you a lot about what that culture is like at the company. So definitely always keep that in mind. And then ask about work-life balance. How do they encourage work-life balance, right? Because again, that work-life balance itself can mean different things to different people. But if they can answer how they encourage it, right? Whether it's making sure employees are using their PTO time, making sure employees are taking the time they need. If they need to go pick up kids from from school, go to the hospital, whatever it is they need, pick up your dog. That tells you a lot about the kind of environment that the company company perpetuates. And then also back to Isaac's comment earlier, right? What employee resource groups do they offer as well? And can anyone be a part of those groups? So those will be some questions I would recommend if you're trying to assess the DNA culture of a particular organization.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that. And let's see, this is kind of, we have touched base on this topic already, but I still like to ask you this, Frank. Do you have any recommendations on dressing for an interview?
I guess a lot of that just depends on the type of job. I mean, generally speaking, you can't, I like to, and you guys feel differently, feel free to say so. I don't necessarily think you can overdo it necessarily. Like a suit for a guy, like a suit's probably never going to get you in trouble. Like no one's ever going to give you grief for that. And for women, like a blouse and a blazer, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I don't think anyone's ever really going to give you grief for that. But if your organization is, you know, not as formal, maybe you can, you know, play with it a little bit. In my industry, it's a suit and tie, you know, for interviews. That's pretty much the standard. I like to, the only thing that I like to do that's a little different is wear colorful socks. Because I think, you know, I have a couple pair of Lucky socks that I like, orange, blue, purple, whatever. You know, when I sit down, people see them like, oh, like, you know, it's a conversation starter. One of them's got kiwis on them. I don't like kiwis, but you know, they're bright. So there's just that little stuff to kind of show your own personality. For, you know, for guys, for women, I'm not, you know, not really sure. So Sandrine, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more.
We already talked about the natural hairstyle and like basically doing what makes you feel comfortable, and you can get a lot of feedback or understanding of the organization based on those cues and how they handle that situation. So certainly gauge the culture through those types of little signals in an interview setting for sure. Also, another culture question that also Sandrine, did you want to add anything to that question before I jump into the next question?
No, I think Frank covered it well, and you followed up perfectly, right? Like dress professionally, but dress comfortably as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as it doesn't distract the attention away from skills and qualifications, your natural hair or how you want to express yourself shouldn't really get in the way of doing so. So the next question is more regarding the culture. So Isaac, it will be for you. What is your approach to understanding the culture and perspective of coworkers that come from different background than that of yours?
I mean, it's something just as simple as listening and trying your best to have empathy for their situation, their background, whatever it is that they're coming from. Because one thing that I'm certainly not going to do, just both as a colleague and as a person, is I'm certainly not going to try to assume, you know, how someone from a different background, maybe a different community, is feeling, whether it's, you know, just a regular day in the office, or there's something bigger, something else going on in the world. And that's, you know, that's something that I've seen, again, particularly in my workplace now, that really does go a long way when it comes to going about your day-to-day in the office within that workplace. And when it comes to your interactions with other colleagues, knowing that I am in a place where, you know, I do feel safe and I do feel comfortable being myself, expressing parts of my personality, or you know, expressing maybe a cultural difference here and there, and being able to properly communicate that. There has to be the basis for that communication, right? So being able to just to offer an ear to listen to someone who from a different community who might be going through it, you know, for whatever particular instance, or you know, any other example. Just being able to listen and have empathy, it goes a really long way. Just, I mean, in life in general, yes, on the macro, but particularly in the workplace.
Sure, without perpetuating, just listening and understanding their point of view, and then offering help if they need to. So that's definitely a great point to make. Reminder, everybody, if you have any questions for the panel, please put that in the Q&A box. We'll be more than happy to address them as we go. These are some of the pre-populated questions that we received from students prior to the panel. So that's a reminder for you before I jump into the next question, which is for Sandrine regarding bias. So have you ever experienced any bias in the workplace or in the hiring process? And what was your reaction? What did you do in this case, if so you experienced something like that?
That's a fantastic question. So my personal experience, I will share. It's not necessarily, I guess it twofold, right? So it's not necessarily about my race or my ethnicity, but mainly the way I look and my age. So obviously I look younger than what I actually am. And I do remember starting off my career, and I was in a manufacturing plant. And just to give a little bit of context, in a manufacturing plant, we had almost 1,000 employees, right? So that was my client group. I was supporting all of them. And they range from people that are, 60s, all the way down to people that are in their teenage years, right? So different kinds of cohorts in there, and you're trying to manage between different types of people in different stages of their lives. And that includes management as well. So it was a lot of, first I'm new, nobody knows who I am. I have to build my credibility, right? So I had to work through a lot of the bias of, because I'm young, I don't know what I'm talking about, right? My experience is irrelevant. I was also coming straight from grad school, and I, never really been in the corporate world before. So, because I did grad school and then, undergrad and then right into grad school. So yeah, there was that perception of, well, she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's young. Who is she to really tell me what to do, right? So, it was a struggle. And the way I handled that was, they're right. I do have to build my credibility. They don't really know who I am. So I really made myself visible. I was out in our manufacturing floor, right? Talking to people, getting to know them, just asking them how their day is, right? And you'll be shocked what people will tell you when you just take the time to say, how are you? And listen to their response. And so by doing that, I even did multiple shifts, right? We're 24/7 operations. So I was on third shift, and people were shocked at first to see HR on third shift. They thought someone was getting fired at first. And then, a few months down the line, you're like, oh, okay, it's just the HR person. And sometimes they'll hold me accountable. They're like, we haven't seen you on third shift in a while, So it kind of became routine. But it's just taking the time to talk to people, get to know them. Also taking that time to learn. I was learning a lot from just talking to them, right? About what they do, their role, personal information as well. And I did that with the management, right? My business partners as well, just getting to know them. And in that conversation, it wasn't a one-way conversation. It allowed them to get to know me personally, but also what I can bring to the table. And that's kind of how I was able to, reach through that or work through that, was really taking the time to learn, being open-minded, being very open to feedback as well, because there were mistakes I made along the process, and I was willing to learn from them, right? And I asked questions, even if I thought they were stupid questions. I asked, and I used the excuse of, I'm new here, just trying to understand. You can now, 6 months in, I was still telling people I'm new. You can never overuse that excuse when you're trying to learn. And so I would say, to overcome bias, just make sure that, use it as your superpower, right? Use it to your advantage. Ask questions, allow people to get to know you, be open, be visible, and be willing to educate, because some of it is a lot of education. So
right, especially if it's a bias case. But when it's a direct attack to your background, your race, your ethnicity, you can only build so much credibility, because at that point it may be something different. So based on my experience, I used to have in one of the jobs I had years ago, someone that constantly telling me, I don't know how things are in your country, but in the United States of America, like, they pointed this out many, many, many times, and it was almost like a microaggression constantly. And in that instance, I still wanted to give the person the benefit of the doubt. I did a lot of educating, a lot of I statements. When it didn't seem to be working, maybe it became a little bit more of the, like earlier we talked about, I, it versus you statements. It kind of got into the you statement at some point. I think something to remember is that you need to feel comfortable, either it's an interview or a workplace. And if someone is making you uncomfortable, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself within the realm of professionalism by either educating them or bringing up policy. Like, my country, how things are done in my country is irrelevant as long as like we're all under one institution, and based on our organization's code of conduct, things are done this way. So don't be afraid to make these types of comments if you're faced with a similar situation. But yeah, definitely thank you so much for that answer. Moving forward, maybe let's see, I think this question is applicable to all of you because it's related to fatigue that all people with diverse backgrounds experience that in some form or fashion. The question is, if you're the only one in the room with a diverse background, do you feel like you're carrying the weight of representation for your community? And if so, how do you prevent that fatigue from having to be the voice in the room to represent your people? So all of you, this is again directed towards all of you. If you would like to answer, please go ahead and.
Sandrine, you can go first.
Yeah, I've been voluntold. No, it's a great question. So yes, absolutely. Many times I have been in a room where I'm the only woman, only Black woman, only Black immigrant woman, right? So I do feel a lot of pressure with having to represent my race and my background. And you know, I'll say sometimes in those situations are tough, right? Because you're wanting to overperform, right? To prove yourself and to prove stereotypes wrong. And it can be overwhelming if you let it get to you. And so when I do find myself starting to get overwhelmed by that amount of pressure, I try to take a step back and say, hey, you're in this room. You are in this room. You've broken several challenges and chains and ceilings right along the way. You know, I have a voice and I just need to make sure that it's heard. And it's an opportunity to also bring change, right? And I don't need to put all this pressure on myself on, you know, representing my race, because, you know, it's going to speak for itself if I'm just truly focusing on the moment, getting to know the people in the room, allowing them to get to know me. That does the work for me versus, you know, I need to focus on how I talk and how I present myself and what I wear. It's more, I try to channel a little more, get to know the people in the room and allow them to get to know you, and that will do that work for you.
And kind of acknowledge your individuality and that the weight of that representation is not necessarily on your shoulders entirely, because you are you and your people are your people. And I think that separation is really, really important. How about you, Frank?
So for me, yeah, I agree with everything Sandrine said. I mean, I'm the only person of color in my office, you know, which can be taxing sometimes depending on what we're talking about. But I'm fortunate that my group's pretty inclusive and they don't expect me to like have all the answers for Black people, basically. You know what I mean? Like if there's a topic or something that comes up, if we're talking about it, I can say, this is my experience, Frank's personal experience as a Black man, but I don't speak for everybody. Right? This is not, and I'm very clear about that. Like, hey, this is how I feel. This is how probably most of my friends feel, but we don't speak for the entire African-American population. So, you know, advocating for ourselves in that way. And then there are times, and I'm sure Sandrine, Isaac, Charlie all agree, there are times where even though you know you don't speak for your group, you know that you have a voice and like what you say in this moment matters. And I think, for instance, the example that comes to mind immediately is like last summer with all the George Floyd stuff. And just like in that moment, yeah, I don't speak for all Black people, but I'm the Black person in this instance, and I need to say something, right? In moments like that, not being scared to speak up, because, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's our job to leave our jobs better than we found them, so that the next time someone of color replaces us, they don't have to climb some of the hurdles that we've had to climb, right? Yeah, it's a difficult task sometimes, and it's exhausting, quite frankly, but it's work that needs to be done, and our ancestors did it. We're gonna do it. Our families, our kids are gonna do it, you know, hopefully. And, you know, it's definitely a taxing but important work. And just I think remembering how this has long-term effects, right? It's not just about us. It's about way more than just us. And I think if you think about that, it gives you the energy to, push through some of the fatigue and, say and do what has to be done.
Absolutely.
That's
How about you, Isaac? Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, that was very well said by both of you, and kind of just to piggyback off both of y'all's points. Something that I definitely try to think of, because from the entirety of my career, I have generally been, the only Asian American in the room, period, on whatever team that I'm on. And yes, while oftentimes, I may feel that the pressure to kind of represent for, for the whole community, I also am self-aware enough and smart enough to recognize, I'm not going to be able to do that because I am just only one person, right? And Frank, like you said, when someone in the workplace or on my team may ask me a question that is regarding my race or my culture, all I can really say is, well, this is how, this is how I feel. I cannot speak for the entirety of my community. It's bigger than me. But all I can do is kind of speak for myself. And Sandrine also made a really good point that I want to piggyback off of, which is, I oftentimes will tell myself and think to myself, okay, I'm in this room, and that is an opportunity, right? And it's an opportunity to be able to, again, just, work hard and be myself. And again, I think as Sandrine said, the rest will kind of take care of itself, right? But so long as I'm here, I'm going to use this opportunity, and hopefully what the room looks like will change in the future, and hopefully I will be a big part of that. That's something that I tell myself that continues to motivate me with everything that I'm doing professionally.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, it kind of puts an emphasis on the separation of individuality versus the group that you represent, and kind of drawing that boundary and that balance, and not putting all the weight on your shoulders for representation, because white people don't have to do that. And, it's your kind of job to advocate for yourself to an extent, but at the same time, don't putting that much pressure on you to the point that it gets to a point of fatigue. So with that, again, this is also directed for all of you, but if you want to go ahead and answer, Frank, have you guys ever been a part of a training that you felt it was effective with regards to diversity and inclusion?
Yes. So we had a unconscious bias training right before COVID hit, that our supervisor was like, it wasn't mandatory, but it was one of those, hey, you should probably go do, you should probably go do this. And we all went, and it wasn't just my unit, it was the entire ethics and compliance unit on campus. And they had a facilitator come in, a couple of them were really good, and just go through some programming that forced people to kind of address some of the biases that they may or may not know they have. And I think it was really effective in that it was the first off, the group of facilitators was a mixed group. It was white people. They had Indian American, it was a very diverse group of facilitators, 5 of them. And the material wasn't necessarily just race specific. It was, you might have religious biases, you might have gender biases, you might, all the whole spectrum.
Immigration, yeah.
Immigration, yeah, the whole thing, honestly. And it was really effective. And I think when we walked away from the meeting, obviously everyone has biases, myself included. So being able to say, damn, I still have work to do in these areas, and seeing other people that I work with or in our unit kind of just openly acknowledge, oh wow, I've got some biases that I didn't realize I had, and actively try to work on them. There were things they gave us after the fact that we could continue to work on and talk about. And I think just that workshop was just a great conversation starter, because it allowed, one of our Muslim colleagues to have a way to kind of say, hey, for those of you who have a religious bias, let's talk, let's have a conversation. Because you've been working with me for years, but you still have these maybe definitely not malicious, but still somewhat deep-seated, feelings about my religion that need to be addressed because we work together, and it's not right to feel that way. So just giving folks the opportunity to do it in a place that wasn't judging, very judgmental, because I think that's a hard part too, is just getting people to admit these things because they feel like they can't. But we can't fix a problem if we don't acknowledge it's there. right? That's the baseline. So getting people to just say, hey, I have these things that I need to work on, and then giving them the tools to actually work on them, and then following up later after the fact on, hey, did you work on these tools? How did you do it? And where are you now? And I think that follow through is really important.
Well, it kind of goes back to Isaac's answer of just listening, just being there, just understanding where the other person's coming from. So it's been the team through our conversations. And if anything, I think everybody should strive to do that for people of different backgrounds for sure. Another question, which is again, more HR related, Sandrine, and I'd like to ask this for you, to you. Any tips related to achieving equitable pay when negotiating a salary? This could be in general, but also with a kind of minority feel associated with it as well. How would you respond to this question?
Yes, always negotiate your salary. Always ask. There's nothing wrong in asking. You know, the worst that could happen is that they tell you no, but you already anticipated that, right? And so what I would say is there's resources out there, right? So salary.com is a great one that you can always leverage. Glassdoor is also another one that you can always leverage, right? So when you're interviewing for an organization, make sure that you check out those websites, right? The role that you're interviewing for, right? Or the job title that you're being offered. Search it up and see what people are getting paid at that particular company, or you can search for generally as well, right? How much are other organizations in that geographic region paying their employees for a similar role like that, right? So make sure that you have those resources in your pocket, and part of this question that sometimes people don't ask but don't want to know about is, how do I even navigate that conversation? And one thing I will say here is, even if you're within the company already, you can always lean in on your mentors, sponsors, right? Some of those people, and you can just talk with them. Hey, this is this role, I'm interested in it. I definitely want to accelerate my career, and I do want to, bring my expertise to the table. However, I also want to ensure that I'm compensated appropriately for it. And then you can tell them, you can just ask them the question, for a role like this, in my experience, how much do you think, I should be getting compensated at this level, right? So that's a conversation you can have if you're internal with the company, with mentors and sponsors, right? And you can always talk to HR department about it as well. If externally you're being offered the job, right? One thing I will say is there is power in the pause. When you get that phone call saying, hey, congratulations, we would like to offer you this job, this position, give it a pause and then follow up with your excitement, right? I'm so glad you considered me for this position. I'm really excited, looking forward to it. However, I was hoping the salary will be a little higher than what I'm being offered. And pause again, right? Pause and let the person on the other line say, oh, okay. And then say, hey, I'll be willing to think about it, and then get back to you with a response. But before you do that, just make sure that you let them know, is there room for negotiations, right? And that's what that pause does, is it allows the recruiter on the other end to say, yeah, let's talk about the salary, right? Sometimes they may not always offer that. And if they don't, that's okay. Just let them know, yeah, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. Give it a day or two, the following Monday. Usually those calls happen over on Fridays, if not 2 days. And follow up and say, hey, I'm really excited for this position. Like I mentioned, I was hoping the salary would be a little higher than what I was expecting. I don't know what your budget is, but are you willing to go a little bit higher? And then that starts the negotiation for you, right? So they can either come back with a number, or they will ask. Most of the time they're going to hesitate and they're going to ask you what your number is. And so before you throw a number out there, make sure that you've aligned with yourself what you're willing to accept, right? Let's say if they offered you initially $75,000 for the role a year, and you're willing to go 80, right? And based on your research, you found that $80,000 is usually where people come in at for that particular role. So make sure that you've aligned with yourself that that's the number you're okay with. And when you respond back to that email, let them know 85 and see, and then they will come back to you what's reasonable, right? And hopefully they do meet you at that 80 grand level. But never, even if you're choking on the phone and you're so scared to ask, it's a tough conversation, I realize it, right? But try to be confident. If your voice shakes a little bit, that's okay, but make sure that you throw that question out there. Because the truth is, and I'm speaking from even an HR perspective, right? We're more surprised if you don't offer to negotiate than we are if you do offer to negotiate. And if truly, it's our last best offer, what we put in that offer letter, we'll tell you that, right? But again, just make sure that you're okay with that number, and always ask for the final negotiations in writing. So whatever you guys agree to, make sure that you put it in writing.
Perfect. I mean, hearing these from an HR professional should help a lot of our students, because oftentimes we always tell them to negotiate and they have to. And again, hearing this from you definitely validates that statement. And I'm going to add a shameless plug here. Negotiating salaries can be very daunting and very stressful. And being a member of a minority group, being a woman, being an immigrant, like basically those add an additional level of stress, and kind of the interplay between those elements make it a little complex. So definitely schedule an appointment with Career Services Center with one of your career development specialists to cover anything with regards to salary negotiation and benefits review. So another question for you, Isaac. The question is, what are some of the practical ways that you've helped to promote inclusion and diversity? And do you have any advice for others for this promotion, especially for entry-level employees, as most of our students will be that within the first few years of their career development?
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of like I've been saying earlier before, it really has to start with you, right? Especially assuming that wherever it is that you're taking an entry-level position, assuming that they maybe are not the most diverse, or maybe are not the most inclusive, or maybe a little more ignorant on that side of things. That change has to start with you, right? Not to get too cliche, but it has to come from somewhere. And who better than you, especially if you are from a minority group like myself, like the folks on this call. Sometimes you have to be willing to educate and to be able to listen to other people and have the empathy to understand, okay, you know what, maybe they are a little ignorant in this area, some of my colleagues here and there, but if they're willing to have a conversation with me, then I have to be willing to be able to educate them and to understand where they're coming from, and not so much just take it offensively, especially if it's coming from a place of just pure ignorance. They really don't know, they don't mean anything, maybe by something that they may or may not be doing consciously or subconsciously. So I would say just going about your life in the workplace that way, but also, again, like I mentioned before, if there is some type of diversity or inclusion, council that you can be a part of and really step up and join, that's a great way for you to make, again, a practical change in your workplace and foster that sense of inclusion. But again, you have to make that decision to step up and put yourself out there and be okay with doing that. And sometimes, like we said before, being okay with being that one voice, the only voice in there. Sometimes it is hard and it is a difficult barrier to break through. But something that I can encourage everyone on this call is, once you do, it's a great feeling of pride to know that you made a difference in your workplace, and hopefully, as we were saying earlier, you made a difference for the person coming after you.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So before we wrap things up, I'd like to ask our participants one more time if they have any questions to please go ahead and drop it in the Q&A or chat box. With that, we'll wait for the questions to come, but while we do that, maybe if our panelists would like to share their closing thoughts, any takeaways for our students that are participating in this panel today. Do you have any takeaways, final comments while we wait for those questions? Maybe we can start with you, Frank.
Okay, closing thoughts. I guess my biggest thing, I guess, for new folks would be, don't be afraid to ask the questions. I know it's uncomfortable, and it's quite frankly doesn't really get much easier as time goes. Like, it's always going to be uncomfortable, so you might as well get used to asking now. Ask them the tough questions, whether it's salary, whether it's workplace culture, whether it's how they manage diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, just ask, because that's the only way you're gonna know, right? Not being afraid to put your voice out there. And then if you're in a situation where you are the only one, making sure that, and I get it, it's difficult, but understanding that it's a lot bigger than you. You know, this is about everyone else coming after you. And every opportunity that happens is a chance for you to make an impact, which is valuable, right? And that's something that's gonna stick with you for a long time, stick with the company for a long time, and benefit everyone after the fact. So, you know, all those interactions are opportunities for change, whether it's someone who might be ignorant to something that you can help educate, or whether it's, you know, creating some inclusive policy that helps the organization and the people in the organization, more importantly. So yeah, taking all those opportunities with your best foot forward would be my advice. And like Sandrine said, HR is scary. I know they're terrifying, but ask them. HR, Sandrine, I get it. You got to plug your people. I understand. HR, ask them the questions. Worst they can say is no. Yeah, I mean, so always ask.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how about you, Isaac? What are some of the closing comments and thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off what Frank was just saying, it's really okay to have a conversation, y'all. You know, someone has to, and you know, maybe if it hasn't been asked in the past, when, you know, then why not you, right? And I understand it can be, especially when you're just starting out, it is terrifying, and sometimes it does not get any easier. But just be motivated knowing that the questions that you are answering, or that you are either answering or asking, or the conversations that you are trying to have with, you know, with current or future colleagues, more than likely these are things that need to be said if they haven't been said already. So, you know, so again, I say, why not you, right? And it's totally okay for that change to begin with you.
Perfect. And you, Sandrine?
Yeah, I agree with everything Frank and Isaac have said, and mine is a little bit two-part, right? So just to piggyback off what they said, yes, absolutely starts with you, right? Don't be afraid to be kind of the trailblazer in those situations. But, you know, you won't feel, I shouldn't say you won't feel the pressure, but to some extent, the pressure is lessened if you're in the right organization with the right people. So that assessment of whether the organization is right or not for you is very important before, you know, stepping in there. Because again, the work environment, you know, that you're in, the more comfortable you are, in speaking up, and always speak up. But then the other part to it is, before I go to the other part, know that organizations are challenged, right? In present day, especially after last year, they have an obligation to, and even just with the current workforce that we have coming in, right? The late millennials, Gen Zs, they're asking this, they're expecting employers to have a good work environment, right? Have good morals, good values that they perpetuate. And so they're held accountable. So keep that in mind as well. And then the other piece to it was just be an ally, right? So going back again to being the only person in the room. When you're in those moments, right, be an ally for the next person, right? Mentor someone. There's always a seat at the table for more than one, right? So don't compete with each other. Just make sure that you're always creating space for the next person and the person after them, right? So those would be my takeaways. And obviously to that salary question, because it's one of the biggest daunting moments when people are negotiating or getting ready to enter the workforce, is the power of the pause. Talk less, right? Let the recruiter talk more in those situations. Even if the pause gets awkward, stay quiet, because when you talk, you've just given your power away from that negotiation. So that would be my takeaways.
Learn to be comfortable with the silence. I think that's very important. And the other thing, kind of going back to what Frank and Isaac alluded, interviewing is a two-way street. While they're getting to know you, you're also getting to know the organization. You don't want to be in a situation where you're miserable 40 hours a week, 5 days, 40 hours a week, 5 days out of your life every single day, like being in this environment. So you really need to assess and make sure that you're comfortable within this environment, and the organization has a commitment to people of your background. So with that, I mean, we talked about giving back a lot, and all of you are WV alumni, and we appreciate your involvement in this panel, sharing your experiences, sharing your wisdom. We do really appreciate your participation in this panel. Hopefully our students learned a lot of things about diversity, how to express themselves, what to look for in the workforce and their organizations regarding diversity and inclusion moving forward. With that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and energy that you put into this panel today. Thank you so much for participants coming to see what our panelists have to say and share with you. With that, thank you, everybody, and you have a nice day, and looking forward to seeing you students in the future with other career services engagements.